Thanks for coming back. I hope you had some food and you're all energized and not too sleepy. Before I start to introduce our next speaker, Sammy Baloji, I wanted to add a small anecdote about an answer to Siddhartha's question when he asked Rick Love if he could imagine doing these projects in a more posh neighborhood. It brought to my mind a small story that my uncle, who was a mathematician, told me one day in the 80s. He had a friend who was engaged in all sorts of social activities. He was a Hungarian aristocrat, but also, I think, a nonconformist. His name was Bethlen Pfaui. And this uncle told me that Bethlen Pfaui was living in Germany, and it was a time Germany tried to figure out how to integrate especially Turkish immigrants. And so this Bethlen Pfaui did one thing. He collected money among the poor Turkish immigrants to support poor German families. So it was an interesting thing he said, because it turned my thinking upside down. And why I'm telling this story is because I think this is something Sammy Baloji also does. He, throughout his projects, he turns sometimes our thinking upside down, and it allows you to think things in a different way. So I agree with my colleague Koyo that we have to be active, but I also agree that you can't be active without revising your thinking constantly, because they go hand in hand. So Sammy and I met 10 years ago in Moscow, but we also found out yesterday when we met again that maybe we never met. And so it had an impact on me, whether I met him or not. And I started to follow his work. And he will definitely talk about it. And I think what makes his work very interesting for me is the histories at the very center of his practice. And I'm a big fan of history. I think thinking about history allows us to think about the world, but also change our thinking about the world, and ultimately, hopefully, change the world. And at the core of our thinking are obviously cliches. I think more than we would like to allow ourselves, or we would like to admit, is where our thinking evolves along cliches, because cliches are very powerful. They allow us to connect with others. They allow us to have simple images which promise us to understand the world. But often, as we all know, these cliches are very hard to overcome. But they are powerful and often also destructive. So one thing he does, he also, in his work and again, he dismantles cliches. And it happened again to me very recently, because while preparing this intro, I asked to see a film which was called Rumba Rules, a film from 22 about the music scene in Kinshasa. And I was very excited to get the link to see the film, because I thought, okay, this is going to be nice moment, music, rhythms, feel good. And none of it is there. It's actually, you sit there and it's a very boring film, but in this best way, because all of a sudden you realize that you were expecting totally the wrong thing. You were just expecting your cliches being confirmed. And once you get over that moment, you really start to look, and that's what this film does. It just looks at this place where this music happens. And you learn not only a lot about Kinshasa and the music scene, but at the same time, you learn a lot about your own thinking. So please welcome Sammy for his talk.
Thank you so much, Daniel, and thanks to all of you for having me here. So yeah, I was born in Lubumbashi, in DRC, and Lubumbashi, it's the red dot on the big Congo that you saw there. So basically, it's all started with the Stanley expeditions and the Berlin Conference in 1885 that divided all the countries in Africa, and those countries became, the Lubumbashi or Congo became a Belgian colony, and the city, like Lubumbashi, which was called then Elizabethville, it was created and divided between, as a colonial city, it was created under these segregation rules and this physical separation between white and black. And as you can see, on top you have the European cities, and just down you have the indigenous city that was divided. You can see it on aerial view down in 54. Basically, the separation was calculated after the flight of a mosquito, because the whole idea, and this is what it says in the Manifeste de l'Urbanisme au Katanga, basically the whole idea of dividing these two spaces was to avoid any contamination coming from the indigenous city to the white city. So they had this corridor, sanitary corridor, in order to keep the two societies separated. And as it's been said, basically the neutral zone avoids close contact between whites and black, an almost empty area measuring a minimum of 500 meters separate the two areas of settlement. This distance corresponding to that which a malaria-carrying mosquito will normally cover. The neutral zone thus divides the life of black from those of whites. It keeps the latter safe from the source of malaria and from the rowdy activities of black. So creating completely independent living conditions for each race. It's a true cordon sanitaire placed at the right angle from the prevailing winds. Our urban planning contents itself with creating developments that satisfy conditions of hygiene, salubrity, and security, giving the white and the black races the opportunity to live according to the hopes and needs of each, however modest this might be. So basically, this is the main topic of the urban life. And this you can see also how it was happening in the transport, in the public transport. It was also, it was copied from the South African color bar, model, but not publicly saying it, but there were separations of race. And also having these trinities forms of administration, the church, the Catholic Church that was in charge of education and also evangelization, the colonial administration, and of course, Lubumbashi, or the province, was really selected as a city because of the interest in mining extraction. Like the uranium that was used for the atomic bomb came from Katanga, actually, and lithium, and so on and so forth. It's still an interest for international companies. So I was born there, and I grew up there. And I've been working with, as a photographer, I've been working with scientists or with architects, with this idea of basically creating a documentation around the industrial and the colonial architecture heritage. But it's been interesting through the process to kind of find a way, but this is all the way that I also knew about all this information that I'm giving you, because we don't learn that at school, basically. So for me, discovering all these stories, it's been quite interesting for me to basically working with this notion of heritage. While I was gathering all these documentations in order to save or to share this heritage, what I have found really interesting by working with one of the architects who was specialized in colonial architecture, the question that he was proposing in order to save this heritage was to think about how this heritage could be shared. How is it a shared reality when the two communities were not living together, and it's based on the segregation and the violence in a way? So I've been looking my own way how to go over and try to find a way to question the city, but the city as a place of violence, basically. So what I've started is working with archives, and this is one of the archives that I would like to show you, where basically the two kids sitting, and the caption says basically, it's a flight control campaign. Each worker must bring 50 flies in order to receive his daily food, his daily ration. So this is a picture that was taken in 29. So it's all this idea of collecting and sanitizing the city. And not only the worker had to work to extract mineral resources, but they had also to catch flies, basically. And I've been looking where those flies are, actually, where were they collected and stored. And I found some of them in the entomology department at the museum in Lubumbashi. And I started to take pictures of those boxes. As you can see, it's written names and where they were collected. And this, I started also to do aerial views of the same areas, which were the areas of separation between the two communities. And I've created this piece that was shown in 2015 in the Venice Biennale. But it's just a way of questioning, and the title of the piece, it's an essay on urban planning. It's just like thinking about the city as a space of segregation, as a space of violence, as a space that somehow erased or even just erase the other part of the community. But how can we be part of? And how can we think about a shared heritage, a shared space, in a way? So it's through this project that I've been showing works here and there, but one of the experiences that I had that was quite delightful for me, it was the fact of participating in the Bamako Biennale, and that was in 2007. For my first time, I was on the continent and meeting all the intellectual artists and thinkers within this biennale that is one of the most important in Africa. And out of that experience, seeing all these people gathering and thinking about the future of Africa, I found that experience quite inspiring for me. And out of that, I came back in Lubumbashi, and we created, with a collective of artists, we created the Lubumbashi Biennale, and we started the first edition in 2008. But as we are in a city where we have less infrastructures, the idea was basically to think about how to use the city as an open museum, because historically and in its physics, as I've just shown you, that there are marks of violences or even impositions of new structures, because, the city itself was created with the law that it's not under traditional jurisdictions. So basically the city, the indigenous city that I've shown you, it's basically people that were taken out of the traditional jurisdictions and brought to the city that was basically a white city in a way. So the whole city, it's a mark of a transposition of colonial power. And we found really interesting to start to work with the city as an open museum, because it has basically all the elements, and how to start by intervening into those spaces and really looking at buildings, and as I've shown you at the beginning, the role of the church, the justice, and so on and so forth, and how we could intervene in those spaces with this idea of it's sort of a performance, or just a performance, like an intervention in order to think about the city and as an artist, and how it can solve even the problem of how to regain, how to reappropriate ourselves the story of living there. So since 2008, as I said, we've been inviting artists and intervening in public spaces. That was a way also to have conversations and bringing also international artists and local artists or national artists, and start to create a sort of a moment of gathering and reflect also on the urban situations and its impact on people. Because what I would like also to say is that the idea of creating the Biennale as a collective, it was quite important, because just after the independence of the Congo, we went through a dictatorial regime for 32 years. And within the dictatorial regime, what is quite important and real is that the human being doesn't exist. You don't have a voice. So it's really the community and how we can control the community that is most important. But by bringing this idea of the collective, what we thought that is quite important is to regain that possibility of having a voice as an individual, and how as individual, if we come together, we can create a new platform, a new space that we can rethink together. What does it mean to just be a human being? So the last edition of the Biennale, which is the 8th edition, we worked around the library of one of the Congolese philosophers, Valentin Yves Mudimbe, who have donated his personal library to the University of Lubumbashi. It's more than 8,000 books. What is quite known of Valentin Yves Mudimbe is the fact that he wrote this seminal book on the invention of Africa, where the whole point was about the colonial library, and the colonial library, it's basically all the literature, or the colonial literature, starting from 19th century and so on, how this literature has created the idea of the other. But how can we go over that library and start to think about other way of collecting local knowledges, or other way of creating narratives and story related to the context where we are? And that brings me also to think about other part of my research that I've been doing so far. It's really getting out of this colonial library and looking at the first modernity. So that means in the 15th century, how this first modernity that meant the first encounter between Europe and Africa, and how it's been collected and narrated in a way. And this historian, Ezer Bassani, did a wonderful work in basically collecting all the African artifacts that entered Europe between 1400 and 1800. And these are some of the countries where you can locate all these artifacts that entered before the colonial era. And most of the time, they were objects that were given as a diplomatic gift. So it's a moment where, at least at the beginning, it was a sort of horizontal relationship that turned into the slavery trade and so on and so forth, and we know the rest of all. So I've started to work on this first part, and one of the work projects that I did, I started it from these 3 elephants that were donated to the Duke Cosimo back in the 16th century, and they were coming from Portugal. Actually, they were coming from Congo, and they were donated as a diplomatic gift. And after this donation, the son of the king of Congo became one of the first black pope, and that was in 1530, and he was named the first black bishop. And it's all started with all these oliphants, in a way, and the donations between those kingdoms, in a way. Another forms of my research, I do have like 5 minutes for. It's since 2010 that I've been living in Brussels, but what I've been realizing also by staying there, it's the fact that as the question of the shared heritage, as it's been experienced in Brussels, I've been also looking at how Belgians are relating to the colonial history and what are the traces out of the monuments that we can see and that we can connect easily, but how can we find traces of Congo? And this works by the professor Deborah Silverman was quite inspiring for me because she connected the Art Nouveau with the Congo motifs, the Congo, not only raw materials such as elephant or ivory that you can see in those sculptures, but it's also like scarifications, how it's been inspiring artists such as Henri van der Velde and Horta and so on. So from this research, what I did, I started to do is to create a research with Nicolas Hirsch. I saw that he was also the architect who's running SIVA, which is an architecture museum in Brussels. We've started to conduct a research looking at basically all the international colonial art fairs that appeared between 1885 to 1958 in Europe and mainly in Belgium, with this idea of looking basically at what they were calling the Belgian Congo pavilions. So the Belgian Congo pavilions were places where basically they were commissioning like the pavilions through architects, designers, and artists. But the whole idea was to create spaces where all the materials coming from Congo could be transformed for the progress purpose. And this is what you can see in those drawings by Horta, or all these buildings that were created because they were representing. It's also a projection of what would become the Congo or the colonial space. But it's also by this contact of being inspired by Congo's motifs or forms, what I've been mainly looking at is how, basically by using all these materials, even the architect and artists were somehow contaminated through the contact of these other cultures, and how we could see in other works that are related in the landscape of Belgium, actually, we could also think about the legacy of the colonial and the connection with the Congo. And out of this research, I've commissioned some works to diaspora artists, and one of them, it's Christelle Mukeba, who basically the whole work was to bring like Congolese descendant within the Art Nouveau's building and have their portrait inside. So, yeah, I think, yeah, these are forms.
Yeah, thank you very much. So you can see that some of our art history books can be rewritten. But are there some questions for Sammy? He could, as you see, he's a prolific researcher. There are a lot of different projects. I forced him to talk for only 20 minutes so that you can ask questions, and otherwise he will continue for another 2 hours. Are there any questions to Sammy? Okay, two. Wait, we start over there, and then I give you the mic.
Hi, I just have a very simple question about the role of the audience in your practice. If you can maybe tell us a little bit how it has changed, evolved, adapted throughout your career.
The audience, I mean, what kind of who's the audience? I mean, it depends on where the project start and whom I consider as being audience. Like when I'm working in the Congo and as a collective running the Lubumbashi Biennale, it's how we kind of share responsibilities in making the Biennale happening, because it's not possible. We've not been granted or supported by the government. It's all like personal initiatives and being supported by other institutions and so on. But the main thing is really to make it happen and to create that platforms. And I think that there are also other artists that have developed their careers out of these kind of connections and platforms. And I think we've created also an audience that starts to understand what we're doing. Like the last edition, as I said, we wanted to collaborate with the University of Lubumbashi. It didn't happen because the director was not interested in what we were doing, but still we had a researcher and students who attended basically what we were doing, and they are continuing like researching and doing their project and understanding what's a way also of basically questioning their day life and how to create narratives out of that. But then when like having exhibitions, the audience, I think like having me here, it's also part of creating this relation with the audience.
Well, maybe I can add something. So, very often you work with other scientists or other researcher, with anthropologists and so on. And I think what it does, it creates projects that are accessible to very broad interests. So I would say it's not a unique art world. It's not targeted at the art world audience only. But because all these other people are involved, urbanists, architects, anthropologists, I think it opens up to a much broader, just open up a broader access, whoever then this will be. It's always hard to know. Is that?
Yep.
You want to have my microphone?
Thank you so much, Sammy. This is one of the briefest presentation I've seen about the sprawling work that you do. Of course, I have to disclose that I know Sammy's work very well, almost since the beginning, that when he started being an artist. But I want to have you speak for the audience about, we are talking about form and impact, and I think that when we decided to invite you, it was really also motivated by the impact of your work in Lubumbashi. I mean, your artistic practice, I mean, let me call it individual practice, that is very collaborative, as Daniel just said, involving all sorts of lines of work, but also creating an organization like the biennial, and the collaboration with the university, and if you can talk a little bit what all that has generated for Lubumbashi over the past 15 years, and what it has created also. We all know on the continent, we can rely on our governments, but we can always rely on people. So, and what this has generated in the scene of Lubumbashi.
Yeah. I think that I had just to stop because I had to limit myself within the 20 minutes, and Daniel was quite strict about that. We had the talk. And this is why also I just wanted to connect both my practice with the biennial and also the curatorial process, which is also just collaborative in a way. What it has generated, I think, I don't have statistics with me, but I think there are a couple of artists that now they've started from ground, from nothing in Lubumbashi or in Kinshasa, who are now traveling and also going outside the country. It's funny because we were with Siddhartha yesterday and talking about one of the artist who was invited back in 2019 just as an artist part of the workshop program. And now out of the experience that she had in Lubumbashi, she decided to go to Accra in Kumasi, and she moved from the Francophones, era and moved into English one, and she's been studying there and she just finished her master. I mean, it's all these experiences I can name, but I don't know how, to statistically. Yeah. I mean, it's really growing. People are more and more trusting in, at least, for example, the invitation to work with the Valentin Mdimbe's library, it didn't come from us. Basically, it's a professor from the university himself who came to us and said that what you've been doing is so important. There is Mudimbe's library here that stayed for 3 years. No one is looking at that. Could you please come and work with it? So we started to work on that because it was so important for us. But it's just at the end that the director or the director was not interested. But still, I mean, there are artists coming from Kinshasa, from Goma, and we have this platform that is really growing in the country, but also out of the country.
So maybe I should just, so basically what you mean, it is extremely important what he does, he just doesn't realize that it is so important because he's very modest.
Absolutely. And if I may add, I mean, we are talking about the Lubumbashi. I don't know how many people can even imagine what Lubumbashi is, and also a region of the world which is one of the most important neuralgic centers of generating wealth for the world. That is the Katanga. So it is, and Sammy has also a whole body of work that started with the mining work, which is very interesting. I don't want to continue, but just.
Okay, I think one more. Now we have all these questions. Yeah. Okay. 2 questions. Okay, let's go. Oh, 3, 4, 5, 6.
So Sammy, thank you so much. It was very interesting to see how grassroots initiatives are political, not by willing to be political, by just the way they operate. And I do see similar initiatives in Europe. I'm coming from Hungary, and we have Off Biennale, we have Biennale. So all these grassroots initiatives are organizing people to give voice of important issues. I would be curious to see from more the perspective of mine being a curator, like more like digitally engaged, like what is the role of technology, namely internet and social media, in your practice and in the Biennale you are organizing? How do you see it's operating online, or how is your audience is using those technologies?
I think it's quite difficult to answer that because it's there's a kind of antagonism. Just as Koyo just saying, it's also a place where all the mineral resources that it's needed for technology and so on comes out of. But it's one of also the poorest one in terms of, giving back those elements in order to. So basically, like in terms of education, both in art history. I mean, in Lubumbashi, we only have a secondary school. We have just the fine art school. It's equivalent of 6 years of secondary school. I mean, we made a tour with Siddhartha when he was in Lubumbashi. We don't have a fine art academy, so there's no any training in art history. I mean, any mediation in terms of cultural, I mean, people know a lot about rumba or music rather than visual art or something else. So we have been building all that by ourselves. And yeah, I think that technology is so advanced, it's what it is. And what we're doing there, it's also with what we have in hands, basically. I can never compare the capacity of the actual technology and what we're delivering due to what we have as context and realities.
Okay, one last question. We're already too long.
Thank you. You started your PhD in Antwerp. So the question is, how has studying in Antwerp, a city with very complex colonial history, shaped or influenced your research? And thank you.
I mean, actually, the title of the presentation was supposed to be title of related to my research. Even though that I'm working or I've been studying or I've been doing my research in Antwerp, but basically one of the way of shifting from Western epistemology or even ontology was to think about how the transmissions is done through local communities, starting from the pre-colonial times, and that has somehow resisted to what the modern system have prevailed to kind of dominated, and through, of course, anthropology, ethnography, and so on. But it's been, for me, quite interesting to look at basically how anthropology and ethnography, and even in history, in this colonial library, how it's been an observation that is more in comparison, starting from Western epistemology and how they look at the others. So it's all about comparison. It's been quite easy to kind of dissociate, basically, this kind of comparison and to start from what has been collected and how you can compare it. Not really comparing it, but how you can put it in connections with what it's still alive within local culture, like my parents or others, and how it's really function within this new society, basically. And how I can create it as a language that basically resisted to all these sort of connections or power relationship in a way. So I've been working on 2 mnemonic devices, starting from my, I don't want to call it ethnies because it's, again, we kind of going back into those denominations. But it's my community and how they've been migrated from the Katanga to Kasai, and how there are remains of these migrations and their adaptations in those places, and what are the mnemonic devices that have been using and that are still present today, and how I can connect with them and introduce them within the contemporary world. So this is what I've been working on, actually.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Applause for Sammy.